Oh, shit. I forgot I was supposed to have a song. Meet John Doe, your new best friend. He's here to take care of us. Okay, that's all I got.
The fact that you realized that you'd forgotten a song after it started recording is the greatest part of this opener. You could have had that happen before.
I wanted, if I wasn't lazy to ever put an effort, like hours ago, I was like, should I make like a Brady Bunch parody version of Meet John Doe, like Meet the Bradys? But I put no effort into it whatsoever.
The only way you would ever do a parody song is if you literally wrote it while I was like getting my notes together before the show started. Welcome, folks. We have returned. We're coming back. It's week 2 of Barbara Stanwyck. We're talking Meet John Doe, which is a very different film from The Lady Eve, both in director, tone, and co-stars. Before we jump all the way into that, though, let's talk about our last Letterboxd movie. The wonderful Zachariah Ford has a Letterboxd movie for us to talk about.
I hated that so much.
I couldn't even breathe. Zachariah Ford?
No, I have met a Zach whose name was actually Zachariah, and I just wanted him to be very clear that we did not share the same name.
Was he like a jerk?
No, I don't. I met him like once. He was a coworker of Sarah's. She married me, not him. So the true Zach, Zachary over Zachariah wins.
I mean, there's no Zachariah president, so I think that says a lot.
I hope there never is. It's not a country I want to live in. So most recent movie I logged on Letterboxd is a very delightful, lovely, light picture called 76 Days about the COVID crisis in Wuhan. Not lovely or delightful. Honestly, sections of it is more delightful than you would expect in a weird way. So this is about 76 days after lockdown in Wuhan, or Wuhan. And really an intimate portrayal of it. It's not really handling the crisis in a large scale, but it's kind of a verite documentary within one hospital that, is maxed out patients. And there is some of the chaos that you would expect, especially that they show the doors of the people waiting out and trying to like push themselves in, and the, overwhelmed staff trying to maintain who goes in. But inside the hospital, they really keep it as maintained as possible. In a way that is almost like a little hopeful in how they can, maintain health crises. They all still seem pretty competent in what they're doing. And kind of an odd approach. It's like, do you want this or not? It's that it was really, I said intimate because it really is from like a patient perspective, more or less. It's all about the relationships that these doctors are building with patients. It's really, keeping these patients as characters rather than really being like about COVID and quarantine, but more about just, the different kinds of people that were dealing with this crisis. And, there's a pregnant woman who, was COVID positive and had her baby in the hospital, and her husband/father couldn't see it. They couldn't really see the baby at all. It was kept in a separate area. So it's, super interesting to watch how it affected different people. So I don't think it is as overwhelming of an experience as people would expect, but it's also not the comprehensive experience I think some people would want from it. But I think it's just a document about how hospitals function and how doctors have relationships with patients, especially from a Chinese perspective, to get that kind of cultural awareness of how things function in other cultures. It was very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, this is so when I was catching up on 2020 movies back when we did our podcast on the best of 2020, I thought about trying to see this, and I kind of, to be honest, there were several COVID-related documentaries coming out at the time, and I kind of just skipped them all because I didn't really want to deal with it, which is not usually my typical approach to stuff I use. Like, usually there's not a subject matter that I will shy away from, but with COVID, it just felt like it was so encompassing of our lives, like not only just like affecting my personal life, but like I did work with the different public health departments across Massachusetts and stuff. So like I had not only like a personal connection to this, but a professional connection. And it was just at some point I was like, I don't really want to think about COVID. So it's kind of the reason I didn't watch this. And there was a Hulu or Netflix had another one. I don't remember what it was called, but that I kind of just shied away from. It does interest me now that you talk about it more as a context of like patient-doctor relationships rather than like a traditional like. I have no interest in the like, man, well, Wuhan got the COVID maybe in like December 28th, and then it was identified and transferred to the US in like January. Like, I have no interest in that. I lived that. I had to sit, I remember tracking this before we even started closing down. Like, I remember that experience. So that is interesting. But the idea of like that, what you're talking about with 76 Days actually does interest me. So I might check it out now.
Yeah, the documentary definitely knows you're aware. Like, it doesn't really try to provide you any context. In a way, I feel like this documentary can be in any time and place. Like, COVID is there, but it doesn't have to be. I think you have the same experience with, just a regular hospital day where they're overwhelmed with patients.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not necessarily about COVID, but just about how hospitals function during times of crisis. I will say, first thing I ever watched on Paramount Plus, streaming sites are taking over.
Yeah, I mean, Paramount Plus it up. I don't have Paramount Plus because I don't know. Do they have anything? Is there anything on Paramount Plus?
76 Days.
Besides 76 Days, what is Paramount Plus's like pitch to you as a prospective subscriber? Like, do they have a lot of stuff on there?
It's the back catalog of CBS shows and Nickelodeon shows, because it is hard to find a movie on there. You have to go to the search bar. They don't show it like at all in the browsing for their movies. They do not care about their movies, but they do have some, I think.
Peacock is kind of like similar to that.
Because they should have all the Paramount movies at some point, but I think a lot of them got locked up in rights issues. Like, a lot of them are dedicated to other streaming sites for a while, so they don't have their full catalog like they hope to have.
This is like sort of how I believe it was Fox signed deals with Netflix to give them streaming services. So now that Disney bought Fox, they're still stuck in those contracts for a couple of years, which is why you'll see like random Disney-owned stuff will go to Netflix rather than Disney Plus for like, I think maybe till 22 or 23, and then you start seeing all the contracts get worked out. Peacock is sort of similar to that in that they, like, they don't show that, like, they have movies and you can find them, but like they definitely are like, we have The Office and Parks and Rec, you should, and Community and 30 Rock. Like it's very clear what stuff they consider their priorities.
Hey Lucas, what did you most
yes,
recently watch on Letterboxd?
Well, hilariously enough, I think you talked about this on the show maybe a month ago. I caught up with Barb and Star visit Vista Del Mar.
Yeah, I have no idea what your take on this would be. So I'm excited.
I saw the trailer for this movie a while ago, and I thought that looks like absolute garbage. That looks so bad. It's going to be those characters, Barb and Star, are going to be insufferable outside of a 10-minute span. I don't know what they managed to pull it off. This movie is really good. It's really enjoyable. It's very funny. It somehow works because if you told me just like off the cuff, it was like, yeah, they basically do like a Midwestern stereotype accent thing the entire time. Like, I would tell you that would probably get annoying. Somehow they managed to pull it off. It's kind of pretty smart. They do a lot of interesting stuff. They don't, I think in some ways, I was actually worried when the beginning starts and it's not related to Barb and Star. Like, they set up this whole like potential villain backplot. And I was a little worried. I was like, oh, I don't necessarily love comedies that become like weird sci-fi movies. Do you think of something like, there's some where it's just like, you could have just kept this as a traditional comedy and would have been better. But I actually think the fact that they are so willing to diversify the story is actually really smart. The fact that it's not just two SNL characters go on holiday to a resort is not the entire story. The fact that they have not only the villain stuff, but they have the people back at home having their weird conversation meetings. The Conversation Club is a great bit. The idea that you can
of the year.
It's really, they said it's also really funny character-based humor. Like the fact that one of the person literally locks the door at 6:30 when it starts, even if the person shows up like 30 seconds later, they're stuck outside. One person just really wants to talk about horses, except horses never comes up as a topic. And then just like, they always have to stay on topic. Like the fact that you'd go to a conversation club to have a conversation with people, and then you would put such a ridiculously rigid rule in place where you can only talk about one subject that no one wants to talk about, like, it is really funny.
I think Vanessa Bayer is my MVP of the movie for her talking club leadership. It's a perfect role for her.
She's the leader, right?
Yeah, she's one of my favorite. You know, I am an SNL fan, but one of my favorite people to appear in those small 5-minute supporting comedy roles. She can steal the spotlight really easily.
Yeah, she's one of those people that like I don't think I knew her name. I sort of knew her name, but also she's like one of those people that always works when you put her in stuff. She's always funny.
Here's the thing about Conversation Club too. Not only is it real funny, but I also looked at Sarah. I was like, should we start a conversation club? Like, is this how we make friends? It's a legitimate idea. I think if you're not a dick about the rules of it, just have some topic stories and have conversations. I think that's what podcasting is. We're just essentially a conversation club.
Basically, yeah. No, it's really funny.
Should we rebrand ourselves? Are we now Lucas and Zack's Conversation Club?
You know what? Hey, we hit a year. Maybe we should do that. Yeah, Jamie Dornan is really good in this and is not someone I consider. Like, I was actually kind of impressed by the fact that he could play this role. He does not strike me as somebody who, going into this, I would thought that Jamie Dornan could pull off what he's asked to pull off.
I think he's a little iffy. He's still a little stiff at parts to it. I think someone could have done better than him, and I think he's fine, and they do good bits with this character. But I think there could be a more charismatic actor in this place. If you imagine like what Chris Hemsworth could have done in that, it would be far elevated.
Okay, that's true. That's fair. But also at the same time, if you put Chris Hemsworth in this, maybe you want to see more of that character. And I think part of that character is that you just want him to be the background character. You want to see more Barbara Star. Yeah. So Barbara Star, shockingly good. Like, I was genuinely like, I saw the trailer and I was like, that's going to be crap. And the reviews come out and people actually like this. And I was like, wow, okay, maybe. Okay, here we go. And I was going into being like, oh, so this is either going to like actually be good, or is this going to be like a weird Snyder Cut situation where everyone comes out and like gives it positive ratings and then we watch it and I'm like, what are you talking about? This is like a 4-hour version of a movie we already had. And there's not that much difference. Yeah, Barbara Star. Watch Barbara Star. It's really fun. We need more movies like this. And Kristen Wiig is really funny in this. What's her? Oh, Annie Momolo. Yeah, really funny too. Just
did you hear the recent news? Their next gig. They're co-writing. I would assume they could probably also star because it makes sense in casting wise. But they're at least co-writing the Cinderella spin-off movie about the stepsisters, which seems on point for them, but also now they're in the Disney world and they're still going to be controlled by a studio and can't do interesting, weird Barbara Star stuff. They're not going to get away with Barbara Star go to the Cinderella palace.
Here's the thing, though. The stepsisters are traditionally kind of wacky and weird characters. I feel like that's actually like might fit their comic sensibilities quite a lot.
Yeah, don't you see they can play them too? They're just announced as casting.
Oh yeah, I think they should 100% play them.
Yeah, or they should 100% play them. They might say they're too old. Disney would tell them they're too old.
Maybe. I mean, I feel like this is a way more interesting story. Like the stepsisters should be way older than Cinderella, because that's like part of the point. It's like Cinderella is like a princess in her prime, and that way it makes sense why the prince is interested in her. And the stepsisters are like really trying to get the prince to him, but he's also a little bit like, hey, I'm in my 20s and you guys are like 35.
Although I'm being very dumb right now, and I'm going to take a second. You know who would be a great stepsister? This would be a great Maria Bakalova.
She would be a good stepsister. You're correct.
That could be a good propelling of her to the mainstream.
Or she's Cinderella in a comedy version of Cinderella where they play stepsisters.
But either way, I think she will work well with the tone that they want to create.
Yeah. I mean, watch Barbara Star. It's really fun. And like totally not something that like, okay, I'll ask you this question. Did you see the trailer or any materials before you watched this?
I think I saw the trailer like a year ago. Like when it was still
I did too.
Yeah.
Did you have the same reaction that I did? Was like, that looks terrible.
Yeah, I thought it was going to be really bad. I would have watched it anyways because I want to support what Kristen Wiig is, doing and writing. But I think the difference is once they did the first scene, it created a complete idea of what this movie was going for. That had me right on board right away. Like as soon as they show Kristen Wiig playing a different character, playing an evil scientist. This isn't really a spoiler. It's the first scene. I like, oh, this is like an Austin Powers movie. This is a Mike Myers kind of comedy but from Kristen Wiig's comedy mind, which is what it is. It's that brand of joke after joke after joke density. What Mike Myers was doing in the '90s, which we kind of lost on those SNL-esque character movies.
It feels really like they really they're restrained at times. Like they're really smart about making sure that Barb and Star are these kind of goofy characters, but also they don't ever make it to the point where this never gets into the range of like really bad Adam Sandler characters where they have just like weird voices and are like just bizarre all the time. Like they're not a turnoff as a character. Like they're a little bit goofy, but you never get to the point where you're like, can you please make them stop? Like you don't get to that point. I think that's like they're really smart about making sure that they don't overplay it, because I think that like the worry with a movie like this is just your audience at some point goes, I would like to see literally any character but them on screen. That's kind of the problem that sometimes happens with the Kate McKinnon stuff is kind of like it dodges the Kate McKinnon bullet where it's just like so ridiculously over the top to the point where you're just like, please make it stop. I would like this to go away.
Yeah.
Let's move ahead. We're talking Meet John Doe.
Yeah.
Zach, why don't you give us a plot summary of this film?
Okay, so Barbara Stanwyck. She is a journalist that recently got laid off, along with a lot of the other rest of the office, because the newspaper was bought by like an oil man, a really rich millionaire, hoping to run for governor, that hires a new editor-in-chief to come in to run the paper. And so they start laying off everybody. While Barbara Stanwyck is pissed off by this, she writes a fake letter for them to put in the newspaper about a man complaining about the politics of the country, taking away from the small man, and he was going to jump off a building Christmas Day. They get a hold of this letter. Everyone, all the local politicians, the mayor, the governor gets freaked out about this. They get worried that's a play by the new owner of the newspaper trying to make his play in as governor. There's a lot of suspicion. So what the newspaper and the oil man are left to do is hire a person to play this John Doe. They hire Gary Cooper, who is a ex-baseball player that hurt his arm and kind of was down and out. Kind of came there just hoping for a job to be offered to him, but got paid into pretending to be this John Doe. He becomes a very inspirational figure for all the blue collar America, and within that he starts to find out the importance of the role he was playing, but also wants to be honest. So when time comes for him to come out in the truth, the powers that be, the newspaper, or the rich oil man, all decide to make it like he was this liar and this bad guy, and they had no idea. They use their power to get ahead of him and tear him down, to where he then really does try to commit suicide by jumping off a building on Christmas Day. This is low-key a Christmas movie, until he realizes, even within his lie, the power that he had on the country and the blue-collar people, and the forming of these John Doe groups, that he, just like It's a Wonderful Life, saw the value he had in the role he played, and stepped off the mountain and kissed Barbara Stanwyck, and they live happily ever after, and play baseball. The end.
It is interesting how you can compare this movie, especially the ending, to It's a Wonderful Life.
Yeah, it was like his test trial for some of the ideas.
The movie is a weird hybrid between Mr. Smith Goes to Washington and It's a Wonderful Life at times. Where would you like to begin, Zach?
I think there's a lot to talk about this politically, but I don't want to ignore Barbara Stanwyck, since that's the thing. One of the things I do.
Let's do the politics second. Let's talk the movie first.
We'll get into the fake Capra's politics and how it relates to today, but let's talk about Barbara Stanwyck.
All right.
So this is a smaller role for her. She's kind of set up as a lead, but then the movie forgets about her for about the second half of the movie. It's really, I think, one of the biggest flaws.
It's really frustrating.
She is a really interesting character, and they change, not only don't use her, but they change her to really, she's just someone who's like there to bring up Gary Cooper and bring up John Doe to being the true inspirational figure he can be, and just like gushes over him. That's what she becomes. She becomes someone just to gush over her romance for him, rather than, between this and we'll talk about Christmas from Connecticut, one of the the best newspaper actresses you could have had in the 40s. I kind of wish that she would have had a chance with like a His Girl Friday front page role, but maybe if she was more famous earlier, she would have got that instead of Rosin Russell, because she's that perfect kind of, that's her whole thing, that kind of New Yorky, wisecracking, woman of power that she can play, that hang up with. I'm not saying this to be demeaning, but in the 1940s idea, she can hang with like the boys. That's how they kind of throw her off on there, that she can, hold power over anybody rather than a man holding the power over her. And she really has that in the first 20 minutes. She does one over on the newspaper by writing this article and really taking the power away from them and being like a con person, so smart in her development of this plan, to really it gets taken out of her hands and ignored. But you see the charm that she's able to give him first half hour, and that's everything I love. And why I still wanted to do this movie as part of her marathon, because I still think she gets to show those strengths. It just becomes a Gary Cooper movie halfway through. Yeah,
it's really frustrating, to be honest, as a film to watch. Now, this is a good movie, but it's a very serious step down from The Lady Eve that we just talked about.
It's a different movie. This is not a comedy.
No, I mean, it calls itself a comedy. It calls itself a comedy drama. It's very clearly a drama. It's also a very serious step down in terms of just overall. Yeah. This is a flawed film in a way that The Lady Eve is not. You're right. She's really engaging in like the first 20 minutes. It is honestly, watching it now, it is sort of like, you see this sometimes in movies where it feels like director malpractice to watch this movie and be like, you have somebody who is blowing everyone off the screen, and then you sidelined her as the love interest character for like 2/3 of the movie. Like, she's clearly the most interesting character in the film. And by the end of the movie, she's like the third or fourth most important person on screen. She's getting like the third or fourth most screen time. She's not even clearly second anymore. Like, it's genuinely
so diluted in personality. They take away everything that made her shine.
Right. Too. She goes from being like the smart person who pulled this con, who set it up, who got everybody built in, who like pulled this thing off, saved her job, and made money. And at the end of the movie, she's just like a sappy idiot who's like kind of in love with Gary Cooper, but like has lost any power or or thought. Like, she's clearly a very conniving, interesting character at the beginning, and by the end of the film, she doesn't seem to like. She's like, I don't know what the point of her character is by the end of the film. Like, at the beginning of the movie, you're like, I get why Barbara Stanwyck in the movie, and by the end of the movie, you're like, okay, you could have just cast like anyone in this role. Like, this is not. There's nothing here. Like, Barbara Stanwyck's great, but like, you could have cast Barbara Stanwyck replacement number 38 or something to play the role by the end of the film, because you could get like any attractive Hollywood actress at that time to play the love interest in this movie. Like, there's nothing in the character by the end of it. It's so frustrating because I don't hate Gary Cooper as an actor. He feels a little miscast in this. This really feels like Capra wants to have James Stewart in this movie. Like, it really feels like he wants James Stewart to be this character. I think Capra fits the look of the character, but not necessarily the acting or like personality of the character. Like, he looks like a down on his luck ex-baseball player. Like, that stuff makes sense. Even when he does the first speech that everyone finds so motivational, it's not a motivational speech. It's really not interesting. Just a pure oratory performance, it's very uninteresting.
I think like you're supposed to know that, because that's when he's like, I'm out. Like, this is just a crack of bullshit. It was just bullshit that people like ate up, but the sincerity was not there. That was the one being very controlled by the people around them. That's when him and Walter Brennan were like, we can't handle this.
See, I would prefer that. Like, I just wish it was a little bit more convincing. Like, he's genuinely like stumbling over his words. Like, I'm not saying he has to be, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, or like think of the great speeches in movies. I just wish there was a little bit more convincing why anyone would follow them. Like, I don't think anything he said was that interesting. I don't think the way he said it was that interesting. And to me, it just feels like Gary Cooper was kind of miscast in this film.
He just doesn't have the dopiness that is required. He's just a little too like professional looking and esteemed looking. You think of him as, he could be like a lawyer type or a player, but not someone
or
down and out
the sheriff, or
not someone who's like struggling and isn't fully like, he's not a really intelligent guy. He just kind of like falls into this, which is, that's the James Stewart thing. Is the Mr. Smith thing. Gary Cooper's just a little too put together.
Well, right, because like James Stewart would feel like he accidentally ended up in this. Cary Grant would feel like, oh, he was smart enough to realize what they were doing and played into it. Gary Cooper doesn't really hit either. Like, you understand why he looks like a hard luck guy at the beginning. You understand why he shows up. You don't understand why you understand why people find him engaging. You don't really understand why he then becomes invested in it. And then even the romance with Stanwyck doesn't really make a lot of sense. They don't seem to have much chemistry with each other.
She's falling for him basically by falling for her own words and her own ideas. She's really falling in love with herself. You never really get a sense of his truth other than him just liking baseball a lot. You don't get to see him be inspirational in his own, which is what we are led to believe that she connects to him with. But she's still just connecting to the thing they created.
Basically, she's falling in love with the words of her dad, which could be interesting if they ever wanted to comment on that fact. Mm-hmm. They just don't. They just like it. This is like one of these films that I really enjoy. Capra, I find him very interesting as a filmmaker, not only because he just makes good movies, but he also has like a lot of interesting political stuff in his films. This just feels like a misstep. It feels like they sidelined the best first part of the movie. They miscast the male lead.
I think it's a misstep in like cinematic telling. It's not a misstep in, I think, the political ideas. I think even it's like we'll get to it, super basic in its political ideas, but somehow is like more relevant than you ever could have imagined now. And maybe not in the way that I think Frank Capra intends. We're definitely not in that way. But I don't think it's a misstep in that. I think it's a misstep in character development. Essentially, that's the main issue. That's it.
Yeah, it's not a terrible movie. It's just like it drags a little bit. There's stuff that you wish was different.
It's a little preachy, but that's Frank Capra for you.
Yeah, but like when he does the better movies, it doesn't come off as preachy, and you don't find yourself as annoyed by it.
I think it does in Mr. Smith, which I don't like that movie near as many people because of that.
Fair. I haven't seen it in a while.
Preachiest.
I do think there is an interesting statement to be made about what he thought, what this was politically commenting on in the time period versus what it stands for now, which is kind of interesting. Before we get to that, we kind of talked about Cooper, we talked about Stanwyck, we talked about Capra. Is there more to talk about with this film? Weird.
Walter Brennan, I'm a huge fan of Rio Bravo, which he gets just like complete old cuckoo by then. So he's kind of like, this is a really put together role for him. And, he's like still a hobo, essentially, just traveling along with him, but get some wise things to say and just a little more intelligent than a normal player Walter Brennan gets to be. He doesn't get his dumb like old hobo jokes. He just calls people. I forget the word for it. It was portmanteau two things that was not Woody at all. That he definitely thinks he's the smartest person, and he definitely thinks he's
Helix.
Yeah, which is lots of something hullabaloo. That's not quite, but either way. He has that real persona that, like, even though he's struggling in life, he definitely thinks he is like more morally just and together than anyone else, which can be kind of problematic. Because we'll talk about the ideas, but we don't even have to do the who stormed the Capitol, because the answer of who stormed the Capitol is every single character in this movie.
Basically.
but he definitely is someone that will create his own political ideas and not like step away from those firm judgments.
He is. Yeah, I mean, it's hilarious that Walter Brennan is one of like 3 male. He's like tied for the lead in Academy Awards.
Yeah, I think
among male actors.
I would nominate this. This is a good performance.
No, it's just fun.
Monica.
He won 3 Academy Awards in 4 years.
Mm.
Like he has like a crazy run from 36 to 40. It's just weird.
And now
for
like, Rio Bravo, which is like a great comedic performance.
No, it's hilarious. Like for a second, if you take the list of actors and actresses with 3 or more acting awards, right? Your list is Katharine Hepburn, Meryl Streep, Jack Nicholson, Ingrid Bergman, Daniel Day-Lewis, and Walter Brennan, which just doesn't make any sense because Walter Brennan like doesn't really have an impact.
And there's 3 movies that don't matter, and I honestly have never heard of outside of Walter Brennan writing for him. Come and Get It, Kentucky, and The Westerner. The most famous movie is he was nominated for, just Sergeant York.
I guess William Wyler did 2 of them, and Come and Get It is a Wyler and Hawks collaboration. It's just that is really random that it's like he manages to get 3 awards. I do think this is such a weird movie because I feel like I have very little to say about the actual function.
The Westerner, also William Wyler and Gary Cooper.
Right. I said that. I just said that the Come and Get It is a collaboration between Wyler and Hawks. I don't have much to say about this film, to be honest. Actually, one thing I would say before we get into discussion of the politics, because I feel like that's probably what we're going to talk about most.
Yeah.
It's because it's the most interesting stuff. Is one interesting thing is that it's really hard to find a version of this movie that looks okay.
The Prime version is ugly. That's how I think I've watched. This is actually the 3rd time I've seen this movie, but I think the last 2 times have been this horrible Prime cut.
Fun fact: I saw the Prime cut, looked at it, saw it was so terrible. Like it's got grainy. It's like grainy. It is legitimately awful. So I had to get like I got a DVD copy from my local library, which was much better, but also still not great. Like it is shocking how, and I think we're also going to run into this with some of the other movies in our marathon, is that some of these movies just look like they just never got the restorations because they never got the famous ones.
Are you ready for Zach Ford has done a little bit of research, but this is classic Zach research, which is I just read the X-Ray on Amazon Prime.
Okay.
So this is the only independent Frank Capra movie that he was able to release when he tried to start his own company, the Frank Capra Productions. This is the only like full narrative feature that got released. So with it being this like independent product of a company that didn't last, it got released into the public domain pretty quickly. And it was on television a lot, I think, once TV started playing movies because of the public domainness. But with that, so many bad copies got put onto VHS and through other releases, rather than because it was never really owned outright by any kind of company, never got the proper restoration release, which is I think why I think there is a better restoration, but there's so many bad versions out there that the sites like Amazon, I'm sure, just takes advantage of to get it for free.
There was a company called VCI that did a restoration in 2001 based off a European print of the film, because one of the biggest problems is that the original print that Capra sold to like Goodwill Pictures got deteriorated due to poor storage. It goes in the public domain. The Library of Congress made a print of it by combining what was left of the original one with the Warner Brothers Studio one. And there's a lot of really bad ones out there. Amazon also, I will say this, I'm just going to take a shot at Amazon.
Don't watch classics.
I love Amazon. Amazon, you're great. You get me all my stuff super fast. Awesome.
Let's not say I love this big mega company that probably does a lot of evil things.
Okay. I love what Amazon
we are users of the Amazon product.
I'm a fan of the Amazon service as the way it functions for me. Questions about the larger company aside. Can you please just do a better job with your classics? Like, I'm just going to tell everyone right now, if you ever get to a movie and you see that, you know, it's a classic film and Amazon offers it and somebody else offers it, watch the other place. Like HBO Max and Amazon have some of the same movies, except HBO Max's have like done actual restoration and it looks really great and it's awesome. And the Amazon print looks like garbage a lot of the time.
HBO Max has the Criterion versions. So like same thing with Criterion. Like if you watch His Girl Friday on Prime and then watch on Criterion, it's just a loads different. But I just didn't have the resources, so I had to watch I don't know, where did you end up watching this?
I got a DVD from my library
Oh, nice. So
of
yeah,
the 2001 restoration, which actually looks. Here's the scary thing: it still doesn't look great. It just looks better than the
does
actual
it
one on
sound
Amazon.
better too? Because it sounds bad in this too. 5 minutes in, there's like a full-on pop, like during what you miss out on one of the lines.
The one I got from the library looks like an old movie that is not Casablanca or It's a Wonderful Life or something that's been restored a bunch of times. Okay. It has the flaws of a classic film, but it is at least it does not have anything that you'd be like, is this somebody's took a camera and stood in the back of the theater and filmed this? You know,
yeah. It's Frank Capra, not like a great visual filmmaker. There's some like good framing, especially like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, but generally none of the pictures look.
It's Wonderful Life.
It makes it look a lot. Yeah, I guess so.
But the way they shoot Bailey, I think, is interesting. At least, yeah. So that's my my little soapbox spiel for a second. Yeah, Amazon.
Don't you think that Amazon putting on their X-ray saying that like, oh, there's bad versions of this because those things is just them apologizing right away? This is why our version is bad.
Sure, and this is not one of the more egregious examples. Like this has bad versions all over the place. There are some Amazon ones where you start watching them and it's really terrible, and you're like, the good version exists. You don't have to put the bad version out there. Like, maybe we should just throw this one away because it's not good. So that's the discussion of that. I have nothing else to say about this film unless we want to get into the politics of it.
I mean, the politics is what there's to say. It's the text and the subtext. It is what this movie is about. Frank Capra is not a subtle filmmaker in his political ideas at all. Because I did say the ideas in this are very basic, which is just like, you know, the corruption of politics and their ignoring of the average American working people. And that as a community, if we form together to express our ideas, we can make, you know, the world a better place. Essentially, it's like a pro-union movie. If you unionize as a community rather than just a workforce, right, you can make a change.
Sure.
Essentially, this is like a movie about the forming of a third party, the John Doe party. That represents the common people.
It's also like, I think it sort of means to, I think that's what it's intending to be. It is also unintentionally a commentary about the fact that people are really stupid and get fooled by really not convincing stuff. Like, if you go listen to his speech, the fact that hundreds of thousands of people all over the country formed clubs to support these ideals of a guy who can barely get his point across. And let's be real for a second, his point doesn't make a lot of sense. It is very much something that comments on like propagations of things like QAnon, where a bunch of people have decided to believe off of, you know, stories and fanciful like thoughts and conspiracy there. Like basically there's nothing that, like, QAnon is a theory that is, you know, it has like 900 different parts. There's no actual proof of any of them. All of them are like succeed with smoke and mirrors and like, hey Zach, here's $5 and I'm gonna flash stuff and you're gonna think, you know, there's a ring of pedophiles. Like it's the most ridiculous bullshit ever. And I think this movie in some ways is like a commentary on the fact that a really you know, people really are in some ways very, 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 very ready to buy into stuff like this. And, you know, these people listen to one not great speech on the radio and suddenly they're like, we're all going to work together and create the thing. You know, we're going to make the John Doe clubs and all, you know, follow this philosophy. It's kind of very much a commentary on like how easy cults get started just by like really simple, basic ideas of telling people that they need to do stuff.
I think this is where our interest comes in, but that's not Frank Capra's intention. He is pro these groups coming up. He doesn't think this as a cult film, but I do think it's the corruption of the film is definitely seen as taking advantage of people's beliefs rather than anything else. Because the issue is, especially, you know, with, you know, the right today, is politics as this like conceptual, broad, and really hard to understand set of just like ideals rather than firm policies. These are politicians that are taking advantage of people based on these concepts, these ideas on like what it means to be a free American, rather than this is what we're actually going to do and want done, and the policy is going to take place.
It's like tribalism, us versus
it's tribalism, that the American voter is too dumb to actually understand what politics gets done. It's not really about politics. It's ideas that don't even get put into place. So, the politicians in this movie, and I would say a lot of modern politicians today, get their votes, get their fan bases based on beliefs and ideas they probably don't even believe in. They just take advantage of, they take advantage of what poor or white Americans or other people, want to hear and what they want to believe, rather than saying this is what we're actually going to do, because they don't think they care about that. So they take advantage of their beliefs and then do whatever they want policy wise. They get away with other things because the poor people are led to believe that they're standing up for them. Somehow,
Well, I feel like
you can believe that a billionaire from New York is out there for the common people.
I mean, a lot of it has to play, both in the original film and the current state of politics, is playing to this idea that a lot of people are disaffected with how technical politics is. And now someone like myself goes, I want politics to be really technical. Actually, legislation and stuff is really technical. It's really hard and it's really complicated. But when you have people who feel like the system never does anything that they want, it really opens up their minds and makes them easily manipulated by people who say a lot of easy to understand stuff, but have no actual basis behind it. And even the John Doe idea it's all BS. It's a lot of like really easy to understand BS.
It's
and
not,
in the context of Frank Capra,
it's not specific enough to even understand. They're not really saying anything. It's just connecting to emotions.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it is sort of the early version. In the case of Meet John Doe, it's appealing to our best instincts to want to help each other. So it is positive in the context of the movie, but that's no different than modern scare politics and scare tactics, where in the context, John Doe says to everyone, we should stop playing the way that those people want us to play. We should all be nice to each other. And then the modern version of that is, we should stop playing the way those people want us to play. Those people are trying to take something from us.
Our freedom.
It's the
we
same
should be
basic
free and act the way we want to.
Right. We should be free. They are trying to take our guns away. Or we should be free to live a white existence. They're trying to bring in people to ruin that. We should be free to live a Christian existence. They're trying to bring in people, which is always a code for people of color, to ruin what we want us to live in. And it's a positive in the original film, what he's trying to do. But it is very easy to see the line to modern scare politics and the idea of, tribalism, and the fact that basically politics at this point is not about policy. It's not about politics. It's about hurting the other person as much as possible while winning. Like, that's the basic of what politics is now.
It's about manipulation of the voters' emotions and ideas. You're not winning on any kind of policy or platforms. It's just, how do you get audiences to be on your side based on just their feelings? Basically, all they have to do is say, I'm angry too. And they're like, oh, this person, right. John Doe is also feeling anger, without ever being specific about what that anger is or where it's towards, but being upset with the system is enough. But not why we're upset with the system or what we're going to do about it or how we're going to change it. Just being mad is going to get the votes, and then they can go in and, in the movie, what's his face, the oil man, hopes to build off this platform by being, even though John Doe's the face, he would be the candidate that represents this, based on no agreement with any of the beliefs of these people, but just saying, I'm also upset with the system. And then get voted in, and he can do whatever he wants, because this isn't campaigns ran on platforms.
Well, he is also basically the super PAC behind the John Doe idea. He is the money influence. He's the actual technical influence, and the person who wants something out of politics behind it. They're using John Doe to get a bunch of people to do nice things for each other. But in the end of the day, what he wants is a manipulatable front man, a figurehead for an idea that allows him to get stuff.
Yeah, I do think that this is where the movie is intentionally successful, and a little more complex than Frank Capra can be, which is that idea of corruption, not as a money laundering or completely law-breaking thing, but just as corruption as a manipulation of ideas and voters and emotions.
Well, I think in some ways, what Capra wants to commentate, like his commentary in the original film, in the context of that time period, is about how any group formed around an idea is inevitably attempted to be usurped by politics, by a politician. Like, this is kind of the classic idea of unions were formed to protect the workers from the corporation. But at some point, politicians started realizing that if we promise things to the union heads and pay them off, then the union heads people will get all the union workers to vote for us, and then we will win. This is kind of, I believe, was not 100%. I believe this was a Republican strategy in politics pre the party flip, which is another thing you have to talk about in the context of the film. Is what Capra? So Capra's a Republican, Cooper's a Republican. The screenwriter, I believe, is a Democrat. But in the context of this time period, Republicans are Democrats. Like, the ideas in this film are very 2021 Democratic ideas, but in 1940s, that was a Republican idea because the parties flipped over race relations in the 1960s.
Yeah. But I thought always Republicans were anti-unions, and this movie, I just feel like it's so pro-union in a way, because it is like a political party as a union. You know, this John Doe party is essentially a union of just communities, just outside of the workforce, which I think that's all political parties are, essentially large unions of people that share ideas. That's definitely how they want the parties, because you have a party line, you have to agree with what is going on, so you are on a common train of thought. And essentially that's what the Trump Republican thing is too. It's essentially a union of these, upset people that all form these same QAnon-led beliefs connected into each other, and that's why that parties became scary, because so many people got connected on the same level. But I'm getting too far away from my original thought, which is Capra pro-union, or did I just read this into this movie too much?
No, I think Capra is definitely pro-union. Okay. Well, because if you look at his other films, there's the Bailey Boarding and Loan from It's a Wonderful Life is essentially a union to protect against Mr. Potter, the corporation. Like, the ideas are there, even if it's not strictly in the context of a large scale workforce. But this is a commentary on what I mean. James Stewart was a Republican, except a 1940s Republican would not be a Republican. Like, if you actually, this is an interesting thing from a political science perspective, in that if you asked people who were Republicans in the 1940s, what did they think of Republicans now? These people would be disgusted. Can you imagine a Frank Capra or a James Stewart looking at the Republican Party of today? They wouldn't be Republicans because they just don't have the party. The party. I mean, Lincoln wouldn't be a Republican in the context of today. Arguably, Reagan wouldn't be a Republican in the context of today. We've changed. Well, just from a foreign policy perspective, Reagan is so vastly different from the current GOP perspective. It's interesting to watch how much politics has changed since the 1940s now. How much the parties have changed, even over the last 10 years. I mean, we're delving more into a political discussion than a movie discussion, but it is interesting to just be
like four parties at this point.
Yeah, it is. But like, even if you just think about the difference between the Bush Republican Party versus the modern Republican Party, it's kind of impressive. It's kind of insane how much stuff has changed. This film is. It's interesting because, like, I can't tell if that's a knock on the film, that it's more interesting as a political discussion than it is as a film discussion.
No,
because it's somewhat a knock on the film.
Because I said the subtext is the context. That's what the movie is trying to go for. That's the point of the movie, is for him to spur up these conversations, spur up these ideas, even in the 1940s. I just think in the 1940s it was a lot more simplified than we're able to make it now, but that doesn't hurt the movie. I think that in anything, that's a huge plus. That's the timelessness of these ideas and how they can evolve over time. But the content of the movie is a large portion of it, and it can override some of the flaws, some of the narrative flaws, maybe, because it still made its point clear, I think.
Mm-hmm. So this movie is very pro, like, outsider candidates, is I think in some ways what their commentary is.
Yeah, I mean, that's the same thing with Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. He has a drain the swamp philosophy for sure, that bring in average citizen to come in, but it's just how these political ideas can get corrupted over time. But I think they got corrupted in the way that these ideas were getting corrupted in this movie. That's why I found it so interesting. They corrupted these, kind of noble ideas on paper, but taking advantage of them to support a platform that is not so noble. And being taken advantage of people who represent the swamp, because even this is a drain the swamp concept that this oil man is starting off with the John Doe, but he is the swamp. It's just hiding beneath it.
It is an interesting comparison to the 2016 Trump campaign, which started as very much of an outsider, grassroots, party activist thing that inevitably became an administration littered with, special interests and, grifting and stealing from the American taxpayer. Like, it is interesting to watch. Like, there is I think a very direct line with the idea from like, it's hard to stay grassroots and drain the swamp as soon as you get into the swamp. And in this film, you kind of see the altruistic version where basically the John Doe party goes, screw you, we're not gonna fall in line behind your attempted use of us. Like, we're not letting that happen. Which is probably the less realistic real life response. Like, that wouldn't happen in real life.
That's why I think it's really so interesting, because we've seen the real life John Doe tomfoolery. This happened. He didn't have a person to go on, but the same ideas that someone was able to fake as their own. Donald Trump was able to somehow get people to think he was this everyday man out for the blue collar people and unite people out of similar ideas. And, writing off a connected idea, QAnon is essentially the dark universe version of the John Doe groups, and that he was able to write off those ideas and really have no belief in them, but use them for his own benefit, his own platform. And it's that disguising behind the drain the swamp idea when you're actually bringing in the swamp to a higher thing.
All three are fundamentally ideas that say, don't think about the complicated details of this. Think about how it makes you feel. You're mad. You deserve to be mad. Here's the people. Here's what you should direct that at. And like, kind of ignore the fact that the people who are spouting it don't like. Trump didn't believe this. Trump didn't believe the stuff he said. John Doe was a guy who was paid off. Whoever's running QAnon this is a giant, like, that person doesn't believe this stuff. They're making it up. That's why they keep moving the goalposts. Every time they tell you this day is the day that something big is going to happen and it doesn't happen, they make up a story and they tell you, oh, well, now it's May, and then May comes and it doesn't happen. They say, oh, well, now it's July. Like, that's the entire point of the thing. Is you've played on people who are desperate for like an idea to hang on to, and don't believe that like the actual structures of society are working for them, and so that you've appealed to this like kind of base emotional level, and they've just kind of bought it hook, line, and sinker. Which is like, if you watch this movie, how on earth would you believe? Like, how do you believe John Doe?
And once again, he's not terrible. Saying anything specific. He's just spouting broad ideas based on emotions, based on being angry that we need united kindness. But for what purpose? There's no specifics on what is wrong with the government or what we need to do about it.
It's a giant it's a word salad. Like, there's the minute you take a step back and stop getting caught in the fervor of the speech, it's nonsense. It doesn't mean anything.
But somehow and I do think the movie did that, because I think that middle of the movie's speech is not meant to be great. He's nervous throughout it. They don't believe a word they say afterwards. I think they know. I think it is somewhat purposefully, somehow, just through the evolution of politics, became this extremely damning microscope of the human voter and how we can be manipulated so easily and how stupid we are and completely knowledgeable of what we're voting for.
Well, that's like the problem with American politics, is that American politics is about legislation and bills and all this complicated stuff. But they've done research and they say like 85% of people don't vote about policies because the American, like, people don't understand them. Very few people, and we all see this. You have conversations with people. You see people talking about stuff on Facebook, and you're like, not even like misinformation. It's like a genuine lack of understanding of how things function. Like, I always see this on, Twitter and Facebook where people are like, why doesn't, the Biden administration just do this? And it's like, well, because it's a complicated process. You can't, like, why didn't they put the $15 minimum wage into the bill? Because the parliamentarian said they couldn't. Why didn't they give her the parliamentarian? Well, because it takes this vote and it's a bad look. Like, why is there it's an incredibly complicated, long-running system that you have to learn how to work in. And it's why people who are always like, I want outsiders as politicians. I'm always like, that's a terrible idea. I want politics nerds who know 9,000 rules. Give me the people who've been in politics for 40 years. It's a job like a doctor or a lawyer. You want an expert at it.
Because politicians then will come in and take power based on that kind of ignorant anger, based on this anger of this politician wasn't able to grant this, seemingly impossible thing because they don't understand that's impossible. So these politicians who know that why they couldn't get it done and know that it's unreasonable can then function off the same anger and get voted in office, and also then complete the cycle, because then people get mad at them for being able to unfulfill the promises that they always knew they weren't going to be able to get done, and then someone else can come in and work off that same emotion, that same anger.
It is a really damning comment on our, the intelligence of our voters, that basically a party wins the White House and then 2 years later they lose control because the voters are like, why didn't you do 9,000 things in 2 years? I don't know, because it's really hard to do stuff. And it's not like it's not just you snap your fingers and suddenly all the roads are fixed and schools are fully funded. Like, it's incredibly complicated stuff. And
that's why we have a consistent flip-flopping of parties in control, not just House, but also presidents. We barely ever have the same party when, a presidential election times around, other than being the incumbent.
Yeah, it's really hard to be the follow-up. Do you have any more John Doe thoughts? Politics, this film?
No, I just want to say, when we started talking about just, cinematically, I was like, was I too high on this, even in my rating and my ideas? But then when we get into the thematic and political conversation, I'm right back where it is, because I do find it purposeful in its themes and its ideas and effective. So it's still worth a watch. It's super interesting to one, think about this while you're watching it, but also connect it today afterwards, like we're doing now. So sometimes we get worried about movies that we're both kind of passive on or mediocre on, but I still thought this was going to be perfect for the show, even though we're both 7 out of 10s on it, just because even though there's flaws, it's so interesting to discuss its ideas. That's Finn Capra for you.
Well, the flaws are interesting. It's not a mediocre film. It has really good moments. It has some lower moments. I think that's one of the reasons that it's very much up and down at times. And I think that's what makes it interesting. If this was just a consistently kind of okay movie, it would not necessarily be the best discussion. But I think that it has some really big ideals, and it doesn't necessarily land on them. I think Cooper is kind of the big flaw for me. I kind of wish that was not.
I think he's fine. I don't have.
It's not that I think he's terrible. I just think it's okay. It's a combination of I think he's okay, and that he being okay sidelines Stanwyck is the real frustrating choice of this film.
But I don't think that's his fault. I think the biggest flaw is the screenplay writing and the use of her character.
Second half, especially the way that they just turn her. They take her from.
They use her to start the plot, and then once she's delivered her purpose, they don't need her anymore.
She's the protagonist and the instigator of this entire scheme, who by the end of the film is a love interest. And that is just a really bad look, especially when she's clearly the most talented actress on screen.
Yeah. I don't know how much Capra's, other than oh my gosh. What is the famous romantic comedy? I'm blanking on the name right now. Clark Gable and Claudette. So other than
It Comes at Night.
So other than Claudette Colbert, I feel like he's not great with lead actresses. Donna Reed's great, but she's very much a supporting there for him. I think Donna Reed makes the best out of that role now.
Even It Comes at Night. Clark Gable is clearly the lead of that. He is very much. He's a man's. I wouldn't say he's a man's man because he doesn't really direct super masculine films, but he is very clearly interested in males as leads. If you look at his most famous collaborations, his best movies, they're all male-led films. And most of them have Jimmy Stewart.
Yeah. He's not the director that Preston Sturges is with actresses. That's the difference that you get.
And it is really interesting. It is really interesting to watch.
Howard Hawks, who's a very flexible director. And what he's able to do when we watch Ball of Fire is a lot different.
Speaking of Howard Hawks, next week we've got another Gary Cooper, Barbara Stanwyck film, Ball of Fire, which is a Howard Hawks joint. Much
nice
funnier.
change of dynamics.
It is interesting.
Did you watch it already?
I've seen part of it at this point.
Okay.
I deposited for this recording. I will be interested to see what we think of that one. But yeah, thank you everyone for listening to this discussion of Meet John Doe, which is an interesting film that I think we liked, but not as good as The Lady Eve, which is different. They're very, very different in the way they use Stanwyck. Thank you, Zach. Did you have fun today? Touch politics?
I had so much fun because I was building Legos while I watched this movie.
Hey, always fun. With that being said, next week we're coming back. It's week 3 of Barbara Stanwyck, and we're doing Ball of Fire. Also, in the meantime, before this episode comes out, you will get to see the 50th episode coming up. This is episode 49 of the show. Episode 50. One is Ball of Fire, and in between episode 50 will be our Q&A episode. So I hope you enjoy listening to Zach and I answer some questions from people. Maybe we'll get QAnon supporters to send us questions. So hope we can make that happen. No. Question number 1. Can Zach explain QAnon? I don't think I can explain QAnon because I really don't want to go down that rabbit hole. That being said, we'll see you then. Enjoy. Good night. Zach, sing us out.
There was a man, his name was John Doe, and he provided the title of the movie on the Lucas and Zack podcast.